Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Political Pulse podcast. I am your host, Ryan Painter. I am here with friend of the show, Bill Tieleman, president of West Star Communications. And Bill just told me founded in 1998. Is that right?
That's correct. It's kind of coming up on 30 years, so it's hard to believe. It's the longest I've
Wow.
ever held a job. My boss is a jerk, but he can't fire me.
Yeah, he kept you around. He
That's
kept you around.
that's what happens when you own your own business.
Bill, I wanted to invite you on the show today to talk about the NDP leadership race. Voting starts on the 27th this week, will end on the 29th. And
Well, no,
I,
it's
I
actually
want,
already started. I've already
it's already
voted, so
started.
it's mail ballot. No, it's mail
Oh,
ballot.
there we go.
So it's well underway. Actually, I don't want to puncture that balloon already, but they will announce the vote. They'll announce the vote on the weekend, and people can
No, well,
still
that's
vote, I
good.
believe. But it's underway.
That's good. That's great. Well, there we go. One pointed correction already. I appreciate that. So we have 5 contestants running. I want to kind of go through those, but before we do that, I want you to kind of give us a bit of the groundwork. How did we get where we are today, where 10 years after the election of Jagmeet Singh, roughly 10 years because he was elected in 2017, we're now at a point where we have not only an interim leader from Vancouver, but the party lost official party status. Lowest, I think, turnout since Audrey. I think if I'm not correct in the 1990s. So I think the party's in a challenging place. So if you can give us a bit of a kind of a survey of where the party is federally and how we got where we are today.
Sure. Well, I mean, let me start by saying I've always liked Jagmeet Singh. Very nice guy, very personable. He did not have the ability to pull the party together and launch it forward, which Jack Layton had. Now, to be fair, Jack Layton took several elections, and everyone says, "Oh, Jack Layton was the greatest Frost opposition." He did not get the NDP into opposition his first election or his second election, and it took a while for him to do the job. To get to the degree where he was much beloved, and then sadly cancer took him. But the problem that I saw, and I think you saw, is Jagmeet and others in the party basically embraced identity politics over working class politics, or a different approach. And so the party became woke without building a base or expanding. And Jagmeet was a formidable campaigner on the campaign trails, but in between campaigns, things just kind of fell apart. And, as a commentator, as you know, Ryan, I do a lot of media. I'm on CKNW every Friday with Mike Smith's show. I do regular fill-ins there. I do other media. I did a global TV interview. I never heard from the NDP federally, like just never, basically, other than, Don Davies and some of the other MPs, Jenny Kwan. Peter Julian would be in touch. But in terms of the central office of the NDP, they invited me at the last minute to a couple of early morning calls, I think, at some point, on less than 24 hours notice. And that was about it. So I had, I didn't hear from somebody in the comm shop. I never heard from the leader saying, "Hey, what do you think?" Whatever. And I just could see things were just getting worse and worse. So that's part one. I think Jagmeet also had the very bad fortune of being the leader at a time when the public, basically voters, decided that there were 2 candidates to take on Donald Trump, and that Donald Trump was the key issue in our relationship with the United States, trade tariffs, etc. And it was either Mark Carney, a Bank of Canada governor, a Bank of England governor, an international executive of large businesses, well-traveled, or a career politician in Pierre Poilievre, who has many attributes, positive and many negative. And in that kind of a contest, the NDP was an also ran, and the Green Party was also an also ran. They were down to the short straws, and a few ridings that the NDP was able to hold. And I think it was pretty obvious Jagmeet had to resign that night. But it has not, the situation hasn't dramatically changed. A lot of people happy with Mark Carney, either because they like his approach and his background, or because they really don't like Pierre Poilievre, and because Donald Trump continues to get crazier and crazier and cause more worldwide chaos, as well as chaos with the Canadian economy and trade. And with Kuzma coming up, the Canada-U.S.-Mexico Trade Agreement, or USMCA, coming up for review and renegotiation or cancellation, I don't think the Canadian public has changed much. They're not willing to switch horses halfway through the race, and I don't think Poilievre can win an election if it happens the next year. I don't think the NDP can recover anything more than what they've got or a little bit more in the next year. So I think we're probably politically in a holding pattern for a while, and that leads us to the NDP leadership.
Well, and before we get there, you brought Mark Carney in, and I think it's really important to note that Mark Carney, in his capacity as prime minister and um, kind of the driving force behind the agenda in Canada right now, has been able to pull people not just from the Conservatives into his caucus, but more recently Laurie Idlout from Nunavut, NDP MP, who came over and joined the ranks of the federal Liberals, which to your point is interesting because it shows that there's a federal party on the scene who maybe, while many people would say has definitely pivoted more to kind of the center right from the previous prime minister Pierre Trudeau, or sorry, Justin Trudeau, they've certainly not just been able to pull people from the right; they're also pulling from the left. What do you make of that?
Well, I think what we're seeing now is basically we have two conservative parties in Parliament. One is a red Tory government, which is the Liberal government. It's a red Tory formation, and the red Tories had good relations with the NDP, ironically enough. There were certainly people like David McDonald who ended up dating Alexa McDonough after they were both in politics. But you know, the Joe Clark, Flora McDonald, that group of red Tories who were the progressive conservatives, not necessarily agreeing with the NDP on everything, but there was some commonality there. And I think Mark Carney is kind of the new incarnation or reincarnation of red Toryism. And that's a pretty comfortable place for a lot of Canadians. So meanwhile, Pierre Poilievre coming out of the reform part and merger with the progressive conservatives is much more of a hard blue Tory. And I think we're seeing increasingly, and we saw it with the Joe Rogan interview he gave recently, him moving more towards the center, also trying to be more personable. He has some very high negatives when you look at approval ratings and things. People don't like that. So for the NDP, if there's a national threat, there's a kind of progressive element to the Liberal government or progressive conservative element. I think that's part of the squeeze that's on. And, I think if we get through Kuzma, which, and with an agreement that's not a disaster, hopefully, that case, then I think people may start looking the other way and say, oh, Mark Carney's really conservative, and he is. He's a big business corporate guy. He's very competent at what he's done in the past. He has no political experience, although you wouldn't know that because I think he's turned into one of the shrewdest political operators, including picking up conservatives and
No
NDP
doubt,
MPs.
no
But
doubt.
he's got kind of a big tent approach, and I think people just want to say, hey, there's a competent, sensible guy who's going to deal with the incompetent, completely ridiculous U.S. president, and that's the best we can do.
Everybody who I talk to these days talks about stability. They just want stuff that makes sense. They want stability in prices and in affordability and everything. Just calm down and just don't be crazy. So it that poses a challenge for any opposition that is trying to break through and show that it can be different, because generally, in a sense where people are just looking for stability, an incumbent government should be able to take advantage of that. But let's go to the NDP leadership race, because we have five candidates who are vying for leader. And I want to just go through, for folks who may have not been paying much attention, just help us understand the perspective of each of these candidates. We're going to go through them alphabetically. So first, we've got Rob Ashton.
Yeah, and just for disclosure to your listeners and viewers, I've endorsed Heather McPherson, the MP for Edmonton, but I'm happy to comment on him. I know Rob Ashton quite well. He's a former client of mine. He's president of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union. Very hardcore labor guy. He has injected an element of working class approach to this leadership campaign, and he's been endorsed by some unions, not all. A few unions have endorsed him for leader, and not all unions endorse anybody for leader, just to be clear. But he's got some support from the steelworkers, for example. Rob, je ne parle in monde de français. He does not live in a world of French, as he
Yeah.
will admit. He's working on it. I I like Rob personally. I do not think someone who um, has not been in parliament or a legislature or at least a council for some like the time should be the leader of a federal party. I just don't think that's a good idea. I think that's more problematic than his French, because you can improve on your French and learn more French. You cannot find another job after you become leader of the NDP to give you the parliamentary experience that's really very helpful. Rob would inject quite a hard, I would say, fairly hard left perspective on the NDP. Some people are looking for that. There's no question. I think Rob will probably finish third, and we'll see what happens. But there is a world in which he could win the leadership.
Very good. Next up, we've got from my neck of the woods here on Vancouver Island, Tennille Johnston.
Yeah, I literally hadn't heard of her before she entered this race, and that's sometimes the reason people do enter a leadership contest to raise their profile, etc. She seems like a very competent and decent person, injecting some Indigenous information and perspective into the leadership. I hope she runs for MP or MLA for that matter, but MP somewhere on the island perhaps and is successful. I think she has something to offer. Again, I don't see her as having much of a chance.
Yeah, she is definitely injecting some of that youth vibrancy and energy, and while
Yeah,
certainly
yeah.
there are some things that she's talked about that I've obviously not agreed with. I do like the energy that she brings, and she's quite smart. She definitely brings, I think, a perspective that I think would be beneficial to not just Vancouver Island but to the House. So let's see what happens there. Next up on the list is Avi Lewis.
Yeah, again, for disclosure, I am very much opposed to Avi Lewis becoming the leader. I opposed the Leap Manifesto 10 years ago that he and his wife, the author Naomi Klein, tried to impose on the NDP. There were a lot of battles. I was involved in a lot of debates. I think Avi Lewis should be running for the Green Party leadership, not the NDP leadership. There, there should be an opening. Elizabeth May refuses to leave the building, it appears. But I just, and as we look across the political spectrum of who's supporting Avi Lewis, it's David Suzuki who's been voting Green and saying he's voting Green for some time. It's Support Berman and the Stand Earth and anti-logging and everything else environmental uh, icon, I guess, supporting, despite the fact she's supporting the Greens provincially, supporting Avi Lewis, many others. So, if you want to be a Green Party, if you want to make the NDP into a Green Party, wouldn't it just be better to join the Green Party and build it up instead? Avi Lewis has done phenomenally well on fundraising, and he's got people like Anjali Appadurai working in his campaign, who was disqualified for breaking the rules for running for the leadership of the BC NDP against David Eby back in 2022, I believe it was. And so Abbey has surrounded himself with people who have literally taken on the leaders and premiers of NDP leaders across the country on a whole bunch of issues. And so why Avi Lewis wants to fight with David Eby and Wab Kinew, the only NDP premiers in the country, is not a good sign to me. If he wins, I suspect it'll be very ten. What's the right word? A very tense situation with the provincial leaders, and particularly in Alberta and Saskatchewan and BC. But I'm fearful a lot of people will just say, "Okay, I guess it's Mark Carney for me." That if that's what the NDP has to offer, so I'm hopeful, but not. Uh, I remain concerned that he may be the leader, and we'll find out.
I feel like he is. So, for many people who don't know, the NDP federally and provincially are both tied. They're both connected in terms of their party relationships, in terms of data and support staff. A lot of those things. I have always been someone who thought that perhaps there needed to be a bit of a look to shifting those connections and those alliances for various reasons. But I think uh, because of what Avi will bring, because of what you've said, Bill, I think he's the person that would actually instigate a lot of that breaking off, for better or for worse. Alberta, I think, would be the first to go because they were very close. I think when Jagmeet was leader, we had lots of challenges there, and I think they would break off. I think the Saskatchewan NDP, the Alberta NDP, I think would happily break off with someone like him, who, to your point, is very much that extreme green eco warrior shut off all resource projects, screw all the blue collar workers. That's exactly the kind of leader that he is, from my sense of things.
Yeah, I mean, ironically, Avi Lewis may be the biggest proponent of separatism in Canada over
Yeah.
the Bloc Québécois or the Parti
Hmm.
Québécois or the Alberta separatists, but it'll be separatism within the NDP. And,
Hmm.
Ryan, if you look at the financial picture that BC unfortunately finds itself in with a huge deficit, B, you look at LNG and the need for LNG to be exported from British Columbia and elsewhere. But as we see, as we're talking the Iranian conflict, possibly well, just go to your gas station. You know what the Iranian conflict's doing to the price. And
Yeah.
we need phase two of LNG Canada up in Kitimat. We need that to go ahead. We need a final investment decision that's positive. And that's something that David Eby is working towards, as well as the CLISMS, the Niska LISMS government supported LNG terminal. We've got wood fiber as well, and possibly others. But LNG Canada is the big one, the first one. And we need that to go to phase two and double their capacity. Avi Lewis is not going to come out and say to David Eby, "How can I help you get LNG Canada to double its expansion and employ all of these unionized construction workers?" Avi Lewis wants to stop it in the ground right now. He'd like to shut down LNG plants. Uh, I understand, and for also for reference for your viewers and listeners, one of my jobs is as director of the Coalition for Affordable, Dependable Energy. And we are fighting to stop municipalities primarily from banning renewable natural gas, potentially hydrogen in the future from new construction, which is happening in Victoria, happening in Vancouver, where I am, and other Metro Vancouver and some other locations in South Island. Um, so, but we are for choice, the coalition's for choice, and we can see now that we really need energy security. We have 100 years worth of natural gas in the ground right now here in British Columbia. We are we're importing hydroelectric power or
Hmm.
electricity from the United States and Alberta. We've imported over $2 billion through BC Hydro in the last couple of years. We don't have energy security. We have an increasing need for electricity, more than even with Site C coming online, which I supported and got hell for from some of the people backing Avi Lewis. Um, Even with Site C coming on, we don't have enough electricity, and we're talking about data centers and AI, artificial intelligence. So I think that we have to make some important decisions now to move forward. And so having a national leader who says to BC, forget about LNG and natural gas, who says to Alberta, forget about oil and gas, and Saskatchewan, is not an NDP that I think is going to go anywhere.
Well, it's that. It's forget about economic sovereignty, forget about economic diversification, forget about making life more affordable for British Columbians and Albertans and Canadians. Forget about all that. Let's just turn off the wheels of production and all go back to living in the forest, I guess, and using solar panels and burying them every 25
Yeah,
years or whatever. Anyways,
yeah,
I
yeah.
I, I digress.
Yes, yes.
We'll go next to Heather McPherson.
Yeah, and Heather is the person that I think would make the best leader. I mean, this should be the end of the argument. She's a member of parliament for the NDP in Alberta, and she won election 3 times, including the last election where everybody else was getting wiped out all over the country, including here in British Columbia, and she wins in an Alberta riding. So that says to me that she obviously is able to connect with people and connect with her riding. B, she's a member of parliament. She's the only member of parliament running. We now are down to a half dozen, 6 members, and to have someone outside the House, and Ryan, from your work in communications with various parties, that it's very hard to have a leader outside of Parliament or of legislature and get them into the news on a regular basis. People point to Jack Layton. Jack had developed very extensive media contacts. He'd been in council for 11, 15 years, whatever it was in Toronto. That's where I first met him, actually. And I don't think that there's any question that when you're down to the short straws, you need somebody who can walk into Parliament on day one, take positions, vote on questions, answer the media, knows the Ottawa Press Gallery as well, and is there and has all of doesn't have to learn the rules of question period or the rules of the House or anything else. So to me, this should have been over right from the beginning, or it should have been a contest between Heather and maybe another MP. But This just, to me, it doesn't do it. But I think Heather's taken good positions on a number of issues. I think the fact that she's from Alberta means she's going to be much more common sense than somebody who lived in downtown Toronto and now lives in downtown West Vancouver or Squamish or wherever. I'm not sure where Avi Lewis lives, somewhere on the West Coast, Sunshine Coast. Um, and I think that's the kind of NDP leader that people are looking for, somebody who can bring a different perspective than Mark Carney and certainly Pierre Poilievre, but not throw the baby out with the bathwater with extreme policies.
I generally agree with you. I think, look, I think on the whole, you receive a significant boost by having a seat in the House. It makes it very difficult for you to get any attention. Jagmeet certainly saw that because when he was elected in 2017, he was not in the House until 2019, I think, or 2018, whenever he
Mm,
got in Burnaby. And it's very difficult to get any media attention, no matter what you throw at the wall. The Ottawa bubble is what media is attracted to and connected to there, so it's difficult. And I think Avi Lewis at some point I think has said he's in no rush to get a seat in the House, which to me
yeah,
just
yeah.
seems bizarre. You need a seat in the House. You need to be that elected
Hmm.
representative on the ground. You need to know what your House leaders are doing. You need to be able to be in the halls. Like there's an energy in that place, just like there is here in BC. You'll know well, Bill, and not being there means you're left out of a lot of conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've also got your caucus there. And the caucus needs to be there when the House is in session, when Parliament is sitting. The members of Parliament for the NDP desperately need to be there when we have estimates on budgets. As you know, every MP has to take on a huge load when you only have 6 MPs of ministries and be able to question them and raise the important questions that people who vote NDP and others want to see answered. So, holding a news conference on major issues in the lobby of the parliament, which you've seen before, I don't think, is a very productive or effective way of communicating your message. Some people would argue, well, Jagmeet was there and he didn't do very well. I don't think that's the issue here. And he certainly was regularly featured in media in the year before that. And don't forget, I mean, we didn't even talk about it. They did a deal with Justin Trudeau. They did a deal with the Liberals. They got out of it. The wake of the Titanic was pretty wide, and when it went down, ironically, Mark Carney was on the lifeboats, and the little dinghy that the NDP had tied to it kind of got swamped. So not a disaster, but so I think we need somebody who understands the House of Commons. Period. Not even necessarily being in the House of Commons, but just understanding it is very important. And um, Avi Lewis and Rob Ashton, and I think you forgot the final candidate, but
Yes,
none of
we'll
them
go
have
there
that. None
next.
of them have that experience. Yeah.
Yeah, the before we go to Tony, the one criticism I had for Heather, and it kind of is referencing something you brought up in the beginning, which I think is a criticism that both you and I have had of the NDP. It's certainly the thing that pushed me out of the party for the most part was the identity politics stuff, really anchoring yourselves in too much in this social justice identity politics, kind of hiving off different groups and trying to triangulate them. And I think maybe where Heather could receive some of the most criticism is her. I think what could be correctly said is focus on Israel and the Israel Hamas conflict. There, she's been very present and vocal on that. Where I think she was one of the ones who wore keffiyeh in the House, along with Matthew Green and pieces like that. So my suggestion would be for anyone who is listening to me at all and cares. Canadians on largely on these things are more focused on the affordability questions, on the questions of how they're going to pay their bills and afford food and not go using food banks and the international stuff. Yet, of course, you have to focus on when you're at a federal level, but try to keep to the Canadian standard of these things if you can. I mean, that's my opinion, Bill. I'm not sure what you think.
Yeah, well, or if anyone wants to listen to me, although it would do them some good, I think. But I don't get all the I don't get all the calls I think I should, obviously. But look, so the top two issues overwhelmingly. We saw this in the recent Angus Reid poll. We've seen it in Ipsos and Abacus. Number one is economy, and number two is Donald Trump administration and what's going to do to the economy. So that's the only international issue is our international relationship with the United States. And to be fair, Mark Carney's been improving or attempting to improve relations with the European Union countries, but also controversially, in my view, with China and India, and that's causing some real conniptions and concerns, which I share, about the violations of human rights in both China and India interference and China interference in our affairs and our elections. And we see even worse than that in some places. In Surrey, in particular, possible involvement of certainly the RCMP have alleged this, and police have involvement of Indian government officials in the assassination of prominent Sikh leader 3 years ago now. So there's some real concerns there, but ultimately, Canada is not going to solve the Israel, Gaza, Palestinian, Iranian, any other conflict there. And
Mhm,
so I think, you and I may differ on parts of that, but overall, I don't think anyone's looking to the NDP to provide new leadership and some new place to go with these issues, which have been with us for a long time, and hopefully will calm down, get resolved. But that said, as you know, there's a component of the NDP where what happens in the Middle East is a huge deal, and I think it's
mhm,
kind of out of proportion for a national party of the what are we, the fourth or fifth party in Parliament. But
mhm.
that's not should not be the focus of the NDP, in my view.
No, I on that we agree, Bill. Tony McHale, I feel bad. We should hit him and make sure we mention him at least, and what he's all about. I will admit to, of all the kind of stuff I've read about the candidates, I think he's the one I know the least about. So hopefully you can fill in some holes, Bill.
I don't think so. Uh, Tony is a farmer. He wears a hat at all times. What Green Acres ish. And he really, really, really wants to work with the Green Party and be a Green. So maybe there would be room for him in a Avi Lewis led NDP, I guess. But I, frankly, I don't really know why he's still in the race. He'll get a few sympathy votes or some fives out of five on the ballot, I guess. But I don't know. Honestly, I don't think he's made a mark. And sometimes, Ryan, we've seen somebody gets into a leadership, they don't win, but they do a hell of a job. And I'm thinking Nathan Cullen as one example, former NDP MP. Other folks get into it, and you think, wow, they're really solid. Pete Buttigieg in the United States. Tony is not that, unfortunately for him, and so
Yeah,
I
yeah.
would predict
Well,
I would predict he will be in fifth. And
I think that's a safe. I think that's a safe assumption. I think the little bit I've heard about him has really, I think, drawn towards that kind of green um, place. And sure, like maybe you get a revived Green Party of Canada with Avi and Tony in it, and revived, in big quotations. Future will have to determine what happens with that. So voting is currently ongoing, as you correctly pointed out at the beginning of the interview. It will end at the on the weekend here. When are we going to get results?
convention weekend, I think I'm going to have to turn my head to the camera to look at I believe on the 27th or 28th, Friday or Saturday, maybe it's a Sunday. Interestingly, being two right on top of political commentators, we don't know, but it's coming fairly quickly. But all the campaigns are pushing hard. There are still people voting. I think up until the weekend this week, anyway. Certainly, I'm getting a lot of emails and seeing a lot of social media ads, etc., for that. So, yeah, and I mean, my pretty fearless conviction is either Avi or Heather will win, and I'm hoping for Heather, and the other will be second, and I think Rob Asher will be in third, and Tennille fourth, and Tony fifth.
Listen, I've always believed, and obviously I did because I was in the party for such a long time, but I still believe the NDP holds an important place, and we need a strong NDP. The country does, the provinces do.
Mhm.
We need that party that can really hold everyone accountable, hold governments accountable, hold corporations accountable. I mean, that is a foundational principle of our parliamentary democracy, and I think the NDP has a very important place in that. So, for what it's worth, I hope they get a leader who can actually maintain that presence and grow and do what it needs to do to make sure those individuals are represented and speak the good word of workers and all that stuff, because it I really believe
Yeah.
it makes us all better.
Well, the NDP has been the conscience of Parliament for a long time. It has also got us, I mean, more recently, National Dental Care, National Pharmacare, previously
Mhm.
Medicare. I would hate to see it turn into the guilty conscience of Parliament. So,
That's a good one. Have you trademarked that yet, Bill? Because that's exceptional.
I'm going to after this. Yes. Just occurred to me
um,
actually.
I wanted before we let you go, I wanted to just because I finished the book a while ago, but I see it over your right shoulder, John Horgan in his own words. You knew
Mhm.
John better than I did, but we both knew the man. Your reflection on finishing that book.
Yeah, well, it's quite a book, and it's very candid. Certainly, he wasn't concerned about blowback later because, as we know, he was
Yeah,
dying from cancer when he did these interviews with my friend Rod Mickelberg, who did a great job pulling it together. I
exceptional.
think it's really good to have a leader who addresses some of the elephants in the room, which he did. I think he was being as candid as he possibly could without being overly hurtful, but there's a few people who are bruised from that book. I know, I knew John for I think over 30 years. I knew him as a staff person. He and I were both staff in government when I worked for Glenn Clark as communications director, and then he continued in staff, and then eventually got into the politics side. I encouraged him to run for leader the second time. The first time I supported Adrian Dix, but second time I was one of many people who privately approached him and said, "Look, please run." And he did, fortunately, and it's a big loss. I cannot tell you how many people who are I was going to say of a conservative frame of mind, but that's you somewhat, who said, I didn't vote for the NDP or I didn't like the NDP, but I love John Horgan. And so, he's sadly missed. And, I personally think David Eby is doing a good job. Other people don't agree, of course. And he has a chance to I mean, we didn't talk about current politics, but David's under a lot of fire for a lot of different things, but he's a very smart guy and a very compassionate guy. And I hope that he finds a way forward. And I think we're going to have at least a competitive provincial election, whether it's in 3 years now, or whether it comes sooner because of the House situation. But I, but yeah, no, John was one of a kind, and the only guy, Ryan, who I saw who grew in office. Like John was known as Hulk Hogan or Angry John or whatever, and he didn't like being in opposition, and of course, nobody in the right mind does. But when he became the premier, he really did change. Like I've never seen anyone change and grow into a position more than John Horgan did, and it was quite remarkable to watch.
I have some private emails from John as my during my time as school board trustee when he was premier, and I go back and look at those every now and then and remind myself of what a amazing human he actually was, and what a
Mhm.
kind man and what a thoughtful man that he took his time out of his very busy schedule to just respond in 2 or 3 line sentences to me. BC is so much better for his premiership, and he is someone who I still very dearly miss.
Yeah, yeah. Well, clearly your emails came when he was premier. Mine came when he was opposition leader or opposition MLA, and they were not thoughtful and kindly. They were quite angry, actually. And but John and I. Well, do we have time for a very brief Horgan
Yeah,
story?
yeah, I would
It's
love a
it's
Horgan
fairly.
story, please.
It's not the only way. Why? So when Adrian was stepping down, there was a big do at Joyce Collingwood area, and Horgan was talking to myself and a couple of NDP staff people, and Mike Farmouth had just walked by. And so Horgan said, I go out and I hire the nicest possible staff because I'm such a nasty guy. And we all laughed. And he says, and Farnworth is such a nice guy. He goes out and hires the nastiest staff. And we all just killed ourselves laughing. And Horgan was laughing his head up as well. But I thought it was just so funny. He was quite cognizant of his reputation.
That
And
that that's the
uh,
inside stuff that only folks like you and me would appreciate, Bill.
there you there you go. Well, I'm glad I got it off my chest and onto tape.
That's great. Well, Bill, any final thoughts on the NDP leadership race before we let you go about the rest of your day?
No, I think the real after we see what happens, the real question will be what do the other MPs do? How do they react to whoever the new leader is? What do the provincial leaders and what do the members do? Avi Lewis has raised a lot of money. I'm not convinced it's coming from NDP members. I think some of them are new members are joining perhaps. And so if it's Heather McPherson, then I think we'll see more of a continued effort to try and rebuild the party in more traditional ways. And if it's Rob Ashton, it will be it will be workers of the world unite. So there you go.
There we have it. Bill Tieleman, President, West Star Communications. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll certainly have you back in the near future.
Thanks, Ryan.